good day, and welcome back. In the last episode, we spoke about the likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability, as well as the impact were that to happen as it related to a certain risk. And as a quick reminder, risk comprises an asset and a threat and a vulnerability. Once one determines one's risk and rates each one of them considering likelihood and impact, the next question becomes, which risk are we going to accept and which risk are we going to treat? In this episode, we're going to be speaking about setting your cyber risk appetite. And around that overall concept, we'll pursue three ideas. Number one, initially setting your appetite. How do you get started? Number two, using your risk appetite once it's set. And number three, the notion of evolving and refining your risk appetite over time. Before we dive in, as a quick reminder of where we are in our overall journey, this is episode number 17. I anticipate recording a total of 30 episodes, but may choose to delete, add, and change along the way based on feedback and other ideas that may occur. In the meantime, if you've not already done so, you may wish to subscribe to this YouTube channel where all of these episodes will be hosted. Additionally, you may provide feedback on this platform. And last but not least, if you have any friends or colleagues whom you believe may benefit from the materials in this series, please feel free to share the YouTube channel and link with them. In a previous episode, we touched upon numerous business risks that any organization faces. One of the points we made is that risks are inextricably linked. The C-suite and board is typically responsible for managing risk. This is oftentimes assigned to a risk management committee. It may be assigned to the compliance committee or an audit committee. But in doing so, wherever it is assigned, they explicitly or implicitly set their threshold or appetite for risk. It's really important to do this. Think about the following. Risk appetite is the level of risk that your organization is willing to accept in pursuit of its strategic goals and objectives. And of course, what I have highlighted on this slide is the fact that our focus is on cyber risk. So as I just mentioned, risk appetite is defined as the level of risk that an organization is willing to take in pursuit of strategic goals and objectives. And it's used to make informed risk management decisions based on the risk rating, which is a function of, among other things, not only the triple, the asset, threat, and vulnerability, but also the likelihood of a bad thing happening and the impact were it to happen. Think about the scale from 0 to 25 as we previously discussed. And think about your personal risk appetite. If you have a risk appetite in some matter that is 0, that means you have no appetite whatsoever for risk. On the other hand, if your risk appetite number is set at 25, I would say you have an extraordinarily high appetite for risk. If your risk appetite is set at 6, you would probably be regarded as someone who is risk averse. And on the other hand, if your risk appetite is set at 20, you might be somewhat regarded as being a risk taker. Think about whether your appetite for risk is the same for every aspect of your life. Is it the same when it comes to having fun? Is it the same when it comes to having fitness? Do you have the same risk appetite as it relates to your family? How about your financial matters? I bet not. And this is the same for businesses. On the previous slide, when I showed the mosaic of risks for businesses, it's not typically the case that a business has a one-size-fits-all number for all risks across all the spectrum or mosaic that it faces. This session is focused on your cyber risk appetite. Setting, communicating, and adjusting your organization's risk appetite is one of the most important C-suite and board responsibilities with respect to your enterprise cyber risk management program. For example, are you okay with think about this risk as a triple, a laptop and a burglar and no encryption, that's the asset, the threat, and the vulnerability. If that were risk rated in your organization as a 20, is that okay? Is that acceptable? Are you okay with another triple, a laptop, a shoulder surfer, In the case where there's no privacy screen on the laptop, suppose that we're rated at a 9. Is that acceptable? One more example. What if we have a laptop and a careless user and no data backup? Yet again, another asset threat vulnerability triple. What if that one's rated as a 15? Is that acceptable? Setting risk appetite is all about setting where you will draw the line in your organization. That is, what will you accept in pursuit of the strategic goals and objectives of your organization? As indicated here on the right-hand side, if we set our risk appetite at 15, what that means is that we will, and I'll say generally, accept all the risk with a risk rating below 15. We'll tolerate up to that level. On the other hand, if there's a risk rating of a particular risk 15 or above, we will treat it. Now in the next session, we're going to get into what risk treatment is all about. But for now, think about 3 other choices besides accept. And those are avoid the risk, mitigate the risk, or transfer the risk. More on that in the next session. Another way to think about setting your risk appetite is to go back to the risk matrix that we looked at in the previous session. Where would you draw your line? Would it be on the lower end, that is, you're a risk-averse organization when it comes to cyber risk? Would it be on the upper end, where you'll accept risks that are up to a rating of medium, and beyond that, you're going to do risk treatment? So the question becomes, where do you draw the line? How and when do you do this? Some organizations define likelihood and impact ratings, and then how they're going to go about setting an overall risk rating, and they decide at that time. Others complete their first risk analysis and look at their very first risk register to get a lay of the land and a sense as to where they are, and they decide at that point where they can draw the line, oftentimes affected by the realities of budget and the current budget cycle. Whatever the timing, it's critical to agree, document, and communicate as soon as practical 3 things: your likelihood and impact ratings, which we discussed in the previous episode, your risk rating calculation, in our case we're using simple multiplication, and then last but not least, your risk appetite. These will guide your organization in making informed risk management decisions. Here's a view from the risk register perspective. In this scenario, the risk appetite is set at 15. This is the line that the organization has drawn, below which it will accept risk, above which it will treat risk. And by the way, a real risk register, this is a screen grab out of a software solution that we offer, might include hundreds or thousands of risk. Most likely, you will accept the majority of risk identified. Of course, that depends on where you set your risk appetite. And furthermore, as you mature your ECRM program, you'll likely change your risk appetite. You may tighten it up. By that I mean become more risk averse by lowering it from a 15, let's say, to a 12, or let's say to a 10. So what we covered in this episode was the concept of setting your cyber risk appetite. That is where you will draw the line. We talked about 3 things: how you initially set and communicate your risk appetite. Number 2, how you use your risk appetite, and we'll get into that in more detail in the upcoming episode. And number 3, we talked about the concept of evolving, perhaps lowering, possibly raising your risk appetite over time. As always, I'm ending the session with suggested actions and references and resources. You may wish, while the material is still fresh in your mind, to undertake some of the actions and review some of the materials that have been provided. In the next episode, now that we have covered the concept of risk, the triple, asset, threat, and vulnerability, the notion of how you rate risk, as well as the concept of risk appetite, we'll move into what I call OCR quality risk management. And specifically, after one decides one's risk appetite and therefore draw the line, it then becomes a matter of what do you do to treat the risks that do not fall within your risk appetite. And there are three classic choices that I mentioned briefly before. Number one, you can avoid the risk. Stop using the laptops. Number two, you can mitigate the risk. Implement the encryption, buy the privacy screens, etc. And last but not least, number three, you can transfer the risk to a certain extent. You cannot transfer your responsibility for a data breach. In any event, I look forward to the next episode. Until then, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you've not already done so. Be well, be secure, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.